on Shabbos, it was the Shabbos Mevarchim, so by Chabad you read the entire Tehillim. And I decided that this week I would say Tehillim in my grandfather's name, so that his health, hopefully would get Around 12 days later, again, I started to think about him. I started to think, man, I should really call him and my grandmother and see how they're doing. I haven't spoken to them in a long time. And just as I was about to press the button to call Skype, a guy came into the room with all these problems. I used to learn in a room by myself at night. A guy came in with all these problems that he had in his life and serious, issues. He wanted to talk to me. We ended up talking until 5 in the morning, and I didn't end up calling my grandparents. The next night, the same exact thought popped into me. You have to call your grandparents. And I knew he was sick, but I hadn't heard anything about how sick he was. So first I called my parents, and my father picked up the phone, and the first thing I asked him was, how's Pamarv doing? How's your father doing? And he said to me, he's doing absolutely terribly. For the last few days, it looks as though he has deteriorated. He looks like he's 10 years older than he was 3 days ago. And he said, you have to call them. I said, okay. So obviously I immediately got off the phone with my father, and I called my grandfather, and my grandmother picked up the phone, and she said, hi, and immediately I could hear in her voice that she was in absolute distress, and that there was death looming in the room. There was no questions asked. I knew that most probably he was going to die. There's a certain feeling when you know death is when death is in like the area, even if it's on the phone. And so I said to my grandmother, I was like, well, can I please speak to Pamarv? Can I say hi to him and see how he's doing? And she said, yeah, of course. And she gave him the phone, and he said to me, I can't wait to see you. It'll be a big celebration. And then I said to him, I love you. And he didn't respond to me. He didn't say I love you back. And he just put the phone down, and that was it. My grandmother then picked up the phone, and she says, I had one hallucination 2 weeks ago, and you were the person that he was speaking to. And then I said to my grandmother, I said, if you want him to live, you have to call an ambulance right now. That's what I said. I said straight up, if you want him to live, he needs to go to the hospital. And she said, okay, and we got off the phone. And that evening, all I did was say Tehillim. I said Tehillim until 10:30 in the morning. I couldn't reach anyone. I was trying to call a lot of people. I couldn't reach anyone to just... I wanted to have someone to say to me, you know what, the good idea for you is to call an ambulance. Go ahead, call an ambulance yourself from Israel and get him out of the house. I had finally fallen asleep. Really, I was forced to sleep because I was so tired. And at around 1:15, I woke up from a dream. The dream was that my grandmother was standing in front of me, and it was the news was given to me that my grandfather had passed away, and that I should call and console her and say that everything's okay. He's passed away. Everything's fine. "15 minutes later, I get a phone call from my rabbi, and the rabbi says, I'm glad that I was able to reach you when I was davening, when I was praying this morning. All that I could, the picture that kept on coming into my head was that you're already on a plane to go back to America." And I said to him, well, yeah, I'm going to move my flight forward in order so that I can leave today because my grandfather passed away. And he said, just so you know, when a person passes away, you know that's the way that it's supposed to be. Once they've passed away, you know that was the result that was supposed to happen. And he said, so it's okay, and yes, you should definitely go home and help out your family in whatever way possible. Okay, so I come home, and this is the really wild part. I come home around 24 hours later.
I'm back, and it's a time of mincha. I'm in the house with my grandmother and my sister, my father, and my mother, and everyone leaves, and
I said to her, listen, I have to pray. I still need to pray. I'm going to go pray in his room, because it's explained in Kabbalah that when a person passes away, that actually their soul manifests then into the things that are in the physical objects that they're most closely associated with. So I come into the room to pray, and I just want to give him comfort in whatever way I possibly can, even though I don't really know what I'm doing. I start to daven, and I start next to his chair, because that's where he always sits. But I feel like I'm in the wrong place. So I start to move, and I move across. So here I'm on this corner of the room. This would be the front of the room, right? These two corners, and then here's the back room, in this corner. So this is where I begin to stand, and then I move slowly over to the other corner of the room, and I stand there. Not like it was a place that I normally sat or anything like that when I was in the house, but that's where I felt comfortable. So as I was saying Shemona Esrei, a very weird thing happened. My right eye was looking at the book, and my left eye was looking at the chair. So my right, I can't do it now. I don't know why it happened. I don't know how it happened. My right eye was at the book, and my left eye was at the chair. And all I could feel the entire time that I was in the room was that there was an incredible tension. That like he wasn't being properly comforted, and I didn't know why. And so I was just, the whole time, all I could think was, it's okay, don't worry about it, just, you can leave. You can leave the world, and you can have comfort in the fact that your soul will be with Hashem, and everything will be fine. Your soul will be with God, and everything will be fine. When I walk out of the room, after davening, I walk up to my grandmother, and I say to her, listen, I don't know anything about what's going on. What I do know is that you should only speak about very good moments that you had with him in order to give him comfort, because there seems to be a lot of tension. I've never experienced this before. I'm not a professional in telling you this, but it seems to be true. It really does. And she looks at me and she says, how did you know? I said, what do you mean, how did I know? She's like, how did you know? I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what I know. I'm just telling you, I told you that I'm not sure if I'm right or not. And then she said to me, she said, well, I've been screaming at him every time that I come in the room, because I'm very upset at him for leaving me, and I'm very upset at certain ways in which he treated me during my life, and so I wanted to let him know every time that I came in the room before he left. And I said to her, well, you can't do that anymore. And then she said, okay, I'll try my best. She said that when she had spoken to him a couple hours earlier, before she then checked him again, before she went to bed that night, that he again was hallucinating that I was in the room, and that he was talking to me. And then she said it was very weird, because when I saw you praying, and my grandmother is not a religious person, my grandfather for sure was not a religious person, she said that she found it very weird that I moved to the specific spot that I moved to. I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, that's the spot when he was hallucinating that you were in the room, that you were always standing. And he was always speaking to you over there. The story gets even crazier. I said, oh, okay. Well, I didn't know. I didn't know that I was moving into that spot, I promise. And then she said to me, so that same spot 2 weeks ago. But she said, 2 weeks ago there were other people in the hallucination. He was speaking to you, but there were other people there. I said, really? She said, yeah. Who? She said, I said, oh, did he even know them? She's like, I'm not sure. I said, that's weird. Okay, fine. So I left. That next weekend on Shabbos, so I started to learn with Jim through the shul. I was teaching for Chabad, and I would walk to and from the shul with Jim, because we live in close distance to each other, like an hour-long walk. And as we're walking, he stops and he says, I wanted to tell you about your grandfather. It's like, really? He's like, yeah. I was like, absolutely, please tell me. And after what my grandmother said to me, yeah, I'd love to know. I said to him, how did you know him? And he's like, yeah, I did. I went to visit him twice. Visit him twice, really? And he said, yeah, 2 times me and my son went to him. I said, for what? So on Rosh Hashanah, he went to the house with his son. They blew shofar with him. And another time, they came to his house and they wrapped the tefillin on him randomly one weekend. 1 week. I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah. I said, wow. Did you know that before he passed away and he was hallucinating, while I was saying to Hillel that you and Ezra were in the room? And he said, I had no clue. I said, that's wild. He said, yeah, that is. That's really weird. I said, so apparently maybe we have proof of how amazing the shofar is and how amazing tefillin are, especially because my grandfather was totally against religion his whole life. And he said, yeah. And then it ended up, so that was the amazing, finding out about, what happened actually in the hallucinations, and the whole chain of events was just like absolutely wild. And then I ended up many weeks later, around 3 months later, I came into the same building, and there was, and it was for Rosh Hashanah, and it was for blowing shofar. And I decided that I would go out and do this, which is something that I don't normally do, which totally is against my natural desires, I guess you could say. But I decided, in honor of the fact that my father had this that what was so important to him before he died was something that he only saw 2 times. I was like, so I have a responsibility now that I know to go out during these days and share a little bit of the holidays with these people. So one time I went out for Rosh Hashanah, and then I also went out for Sukkot. And the time that I went for Sukkot, there was a man. We were standing together, and basically I went with 2 younger guys, like around 16, 17 years old, and they asked 2 people if they would like to shake lulav and etro. And they said absolutely. They said, no, we're not interested. We're not into religion. And, no, thank you. And I didn't yet get to speak to them. Normally I speak to people at length. And I walked up to them and said, so why don't you want to do it? And they said, because we've never done anything like this. One man said, my wife died a few years ago. She liked things that had to do with the 5 books of Moses, but it just makes me sad to think about these things now, so I don't do anything. I said, oh, that's interesting, because my grandfather was like that too. And then I explained to the 2 men the story of what had happened with my grandfather, and with putting on tefillin and blowing the shofar for him. Jim and Ezra, we were people that he didn't even know that's who was the people that appeared to him in the 2 weeks before he passed away. And I said, so it was very precious for him, clearly, and he was very against it. And probably he was even against it when they came into the room to ask him to do it. I said, but in the end, it clearly came out, the conclusion came out, that even if he didn't want it for a long time in his life, it was very special and very important. And both of the men looked at me, and instead of saying no, they put their arms up for the lulav and etrog, and they said, okay, fine, tell us what we have to do, and it's good. And then a couple of weeks later, the guy, the man that I had walked up to, I came back to his house to say hi to him with tefillin, and he took me around his house, and he showed me different pictures, and I asked him if he ever put on tefillin before, and he said no, his son had, but not him. His son had a bar mitzvah, but in the time period that he was growing up was the Great Depression, and he never did it. He never put on tefillin. So I said to him, so do you know what a bar mitzvah is? And he said, well, yeah, my son had one. I said, right, so your son put on tefillin, that's a bar mitzvah. You haven't missed out on having a bar mitzvah yet. And he said, really? I said, yeah. And he said, oh, so this man actually didn't have a good memory. So he didn't remember what I had told him before, but he remembered me, and he still liked me a lot. So I had to retell the story of what happened to my grandfather. He said, yeah, I'd love to put on tefillin. Please put on tefillin, after I said the story again. So I put tefillin on him. Eventually, I went back to Israel to go back to yeshiva. And around 1 month after going back to Israel, my grandmother called me on the phone and said, I was at bingo. Marshall is the guy's name. Marshall was there, and he walked up to me, and he said that he saw you. And I said, really? So he still remembers who I am? And she said, yeah, not only does he remember who you are, but he walked up to me and he said that you gave him a bar mitzvah, and he started to cry. And that's the story.